I almost didn't go. That sentence sounds dramatic because it is. I'm Diana Mercer, founder and CEO of Med Advance, a company that started in a single rented room with a whiteboard full of scribbles and a voicemail inbox full of cold rejections. I build things for a living, products, teams, systems that fix broken processes in healthcare, and I am very good at recognizing what's broken and whether it's worth fixing. I am also, for the record, a single parent with a small human named Lucas, who thinks calculators are magic and will eat anything that's not nailed down. We live in a house that smells faintly of coffee, solder, and the kind of optimism that comes from paying your employees on time. So when an invite to my sister Claire's wedding arrived, handwritten, earnest, from a man named Michael, who was clearly as bewilderingly earnest as he looked in his Instagram photos, I read it twice, put it on the fridge, and did what I always do when the emotional spreadsheets get messy. I ran an ROI analysis in my head. What would this cost Lucas? What would it cost me? Time, energy, reputation. What could possibly be gained? Michael didn't know why I'd been absent for more than a decade. He probably thought Claire and I had drifted apart like most sisters do. Slow, private, full of unspoken forgiveness. He'd invited both of us because that's what you do when you want your wedding to be whole. He had no idea there was anything to invite beyond people who tolerate each other at family reunions. That ignorance is important because it's what made me consider going at all. Michael's invitation was not a trap. It was an honest olive branch. For reasons I couldn't entirely justify to myself. Curiosity, a hope for closure, or just the human craving to watch a myth unravel in real time, I said yes. On the day, I wore what I wear to most important meetings. Something that reads calm, competent, and doesn't require fidgeting. Not flashy because I'm allergic to over-celebrity. Not drab because I like good tailoring. A navy sheath, sensible heels, a watch that survived 2 funding rounds and a hostile takeover attempt. Lucas wore a tiny blazer he insisted on because suits make you brave, and he clutched a dinosaur-shaped cookie like it was a security blanket. The venue was the kind of place people choose when they want nothing to distract from the story they're trying to tell. White tents, eucalyptus garlands, string lights that look like stars until you trip over an uneven patio slab. Guests moved through clusters like School of Fish, familiar, choreographed, full of small talk. Claire was radiant, which is to say, she was doing exactly what she was supposed to do. Smile, the practiced smile of someone who has decided how their life's narrative should read and is now getting everyone to agree with it. I tried to be anonymous. CEO isn't a title that announces itself at weddings, at least not unless you bring it up in a toast. But people notice things. The way you hold yourself, the quiet confidence of someone who can navigate complex problems, the way a child gravitates toward you, because your hands smell faintly of projects and late-night pizza. Small talk found me anyway. Are you in healthcare? Where do you work? And I answered the questions that needed answering and deflected the ones that didn't. I wasn't there to perform. I was there to see her, to see Claire, without the world of rumors, loans, and expectations shading the view. What was at stake that day wasn't a ledger entry. It was a story. The story about who we were as sisters. And the version of that story Claire had been selling to a room full of people who had bankrolled half her life. It was Lucas's first impression of his aunt, the little data point that would later become a memory. It was my own sense of whether I could hold my head up in the same room as someone who had been absent for reasons that cut deeper than a missed birthday. And yes, if I'm honest, it was also about control. I have spent my adult life proving I can make something from nothing. I'm not immune to the small, sharp satisfaction of reclaiming my own narrative. Walking into that tent, I felt like a product relaunch. All the parts polished, every possible slide deck rehearsed, but the outcome still untested. So I walked in, Lucas's hand in mine, and watched Claire laugh as if laughter could seal decisions made long ago. Michael greeted me with the kind of earnest relief people reserve for strangers who arrive and make the event feel complete. He did not know, could not know, what the room was about to hold when the quiet facts I carried into it brushed against the bright story Claire had written for herself. The story of how Claire became the family's saint and I became the family's cautionary tale started with a checkbook. When I was 17, My parents told me that the college fund they'd been promising since I was old enough to spell scholarship was gone. Not just depleted, gone, siphoned to cover Claire's acceptance into Harvard. She has potential, they said, as if I were a half-finished project sitting in the garage. Claire was the younger sister, the golden child, the one who played piano at church recitals and got sympathy migraines during chores. I was the practical one, the planner, the kid who actually read the fine print on financial aid forms. But in my parents' eyes, all that mattered was that Harvard letter. I asked what I was supposed to do, now that the future I'd been building toward had been gutted. My father shrugged. My mother said something that still echoes like a cracked bell. "You'll figure it out, Diana. You always do." It wasn't a compliment. It was a dismissal. Then came the lies. To cover up their betrayal and to make sure no one questioned why Claire had Harvard tuition covered while I was nowhere to be seen, they told extended family and neighbors that I'd flunked out, that I'd partied away my chance. It was an efficient narrative, the reckless older daughter versus the brilliant younger one. They even convinced themselves it was true. Every holiday card, every family dinner I wasn't invited to, became a chance to reinforce the fiction. I left. There was nothing for me in that house but the echo of slammed doors and a bank account that read $47.12. The next decade wasn't a neat bootstrap montage. It was grueling. I waitressed double shifts, slept in a studio apartment that smelled like old radiator pipes, and learned to code from library books because I couldn't afford a single course. I pieced together side hustles until one of them, an idea about making medical billing transparent and actually human readable, took on momentum. That project grew into MedAdvance, a company that now employs hundreds, saves hospitals millions, and is worth more than the house my parents mortgaged twice to keep Claire's life afloat. Every board meeting, every product launch, every late night at the office was my rebuttal to the story they told about me. Not in words, but in outcomes. My parents wrote me off as irresponsible. Fine. I became the kind of responsible that builds empires out of scraps. And yet, no matter how high MedAdvance climbed, no matter how many people I employed, there was a ghost debt hanging over me. Not financial, emotional. The sense that my own family had chosen someone else's future over mine, then salted the wound with lies. That's the history I carried with me into Claire's wedding. Not just a decade of absence, but a decade of surviving the erasure, which made walking into that white tent not just an RSVP, it was an act of defiance, a living reminder that the version of me they buried never stayed buried. The thing about lies is they're like badly engineered bridges. They look sturdy from a distance, but the closer you get, the more you notice the wobble. Claire had built hers with Harvard letterhead and parental applause. At the wedding, that bridge finally started to creak. She was radiant, of course. White lace, champagne flute, the kind of rehearsed smile that photographs well from any angle. And she played her role with precision, greeting relatives, bragging in half sentences about her Harvard days, and weaving in mentions of our practice like she was casually reminding the world that she held a scalpel between rounds of Pilates. But weddings are conversational pressure cookers. People talk, strangers swap stories, and Claire's stories didn't line up. It started when one of the guests, a surgeon from Boston who actually went to Harvard, asked Claire who her thesis advisor had been. She laughed lightly, dodged the question, and steered the conversation toward floral arrangements. To most people, it sounded like nerves. To me, it sounded like the silence of someone who never sat in those lecture halls. Later, another guest, a hospital administrator, tried to pin her down on the specifics of managing a medical practice. Claire deflected again, her answers vague, almost rehearsed. It was like watching someone bluff in a card game but forgetting which suit was trump. And then Lucas spoke. Sweet, oblivious Lucas, who'd been charming the entire kids' table with dinosaur trivia and a magic trick he refused to explain. When one of Michael's uncles asked him where Mommy went to school, Lucas piped up without hesitation. Mom says she was supposed to go to Harvard, but Grandma and Grandpa gave all her money to Aunt Claire, so she started MedAdvance instead. The room went quiet for a half beat too long. Not the kind of silence you get when people are bored. No, this was the loaded silence of adults recalibrating their mental math. Claire's smile faltered. Michael's brow furrowed. Someone coughed too loud, as if that could reset the moment. I hadn't told Lucas to say that. Kids don't perform your scripts, they tell your truth. He had overheard bits of my story, pieced it together the way children do, and dropped it in the middle of a wedding, like a confetti cannon filled with secrets. From that point on, the cracks spread. Questions that had once seemed harmless now became landmines. Every Harvard story Claire told was met with sidelong glances. Every mention of managing the practice was weighed against her flimsy details. And through it all, I stayed quiet, polite, sipping my champagne as though the carbonation wasn't rising with tension. I hadn't come to ruin her wedding. But lies don't need saboteurs. They collapse under their own weight. All I had to do was exist, and for Claire, my existence was already enough to unravel the fiction she'd spent a decade perfecting. Michael wasn't a fool. That's what made everything unravel so quickly. He wasn't just the starry-eyed groom who believed Claire's curated version of herself. He was a man who knew the difference between a story and a statement of fact. And once Lucas's innocent confession and Claire's evasions cast shadows on her Harvard claims, he did what smart people do. He checked. It started with phone calls. Alumni offices, old classmates, medical boards, the kind of quiet inquiries that don't make noise until the answers line up wrong. There was no record of Claire Mercer in Harvard's graduating classes, no professors who remembered her, no paper trail that linked her to any of the things she had sworn were true. But the truth Michael uncovered was uglier than a missing diploma. As he sifted deeper, following the paper trail around Claire's supposed management of her parents' medical practice, he uncovered a different reality. Medicare fraud. Not sloppy bookkeeping, not harmless mistakes, systematic overbilling, kickbacks, and falsified patient records. And Claire had been knee-deep in it, signing forms, sending invoices, all the while believing she was simply helping out the family business. Whether she fully understood what she was complicit in didn't matter. Her signature was everywhere. For Michael, that was the end. There's no way to vow for better or worse when you discover the worse is a federal crime. He filed for annulment, quietly at first, then with a blunt clarity that left no room for Claire's dramatics. More than that, he handed the evidence to investigators. Every file, every signature, every lie that had been dressed up as duty. People asked me if I celebrated, if I gloated, if I whispered "I told you so" into my champagne glass. I didn't. That kind of chaos is self-consuming. I've seen it enough to know that if you feed on it, it burns you too. When the investigators called me, I answered their questions plainly. I confirmed what I remembered from the years I'd spent near the practice, paperwork that didn't add up, explanations that never quite made sense. I gave them facts, not color commentary. My testimony wasn't a knife. It was a ledger entry. Then I stepped back, because this wasn't my war anymore. I had fought my battles long ago, in coffee-stained apartments, on shoestring budgets, against the fiction of who my parents told the world I was. I had nothing left to prove. For the first time, the weight of the past wasn't mine to carry. It was theirs. Claire, my parents, the whole tangled knot of lies, they had finally collapsed under their own architecture. And I, for once, was standing outside the wreckage, untouched. It arrived in a plain envelope. No return address, no flourish. Just my name, Diana Mercer, written in a hand I hadn't seen in years, but still recognized instantly. Claire's letter was short, almost brittle, like she'd run out of words halfway through and had to squeeze the rest into the margins. She admitted it all, that our parents had stolen my future to buy hers, that she'd parroted their lies because it was easier than confronting them, that she'd let herself believe in the story even when the seams started to show. She confessed that she never went to Harvard, never managed a medical practice, never lived the life she insisted was hers. And she wrote the one sentence I never expected to see. They lied about you because they knew you would survive it. I let them because I wanted to believe I deserved what they gave me. For once, there was no defense, no excuse, just the raw acknowledgement that the fractures between us hadn't been imaginary. They were carved by hands we both trusted. I sat with the letter for days. Lucas used it as a bookmark once before I snatched it back and tucked it into my desk. Part of me wanted to throw it in the shredder and let the sound of paper tearing serve as my closure. Another part of me, the CEO part, the builder part, saw something else. A woman standing at the rubble of her own lies, holding nothing but the option to start over. So I answered, not with forgiveness wrapped in sentiment, not with vengeance dripping in satisfaction, but with an offer. I slipped a Med-Advance internship application into an envelope, scrawled, "If you want a real beginning, start here on the corner," and mailed it back. It wasn't a handout. It wasn't absolution. It was a door, barely cracked, leading somewhere she'd have to walk entirely on her own. Months later, Med-Advance launched the Mercer First Generation Medical Scholarship, designed for kids like the version of me who never got their fund, who were told they didn't matter, who had to fight twice as hard just to stand where others were placed. I did it not for Claire, not for my parents, but for the ghosts of all of us who lost futures to someone else's potential. When I looked at my life, my son, my company, my scholarship fund, I realized something simple. My story no longer began with betrayal. It ended with choice, and the choice was mine.